Abigail Mercer pressed her dead husband's rifle against a stranger's chest and pulled the hammer back. Her hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Behind her, 11-year-old Ethan coughed so hard the cabin walls seemed to rattle. The well had gone dry 3 days ago. The cattle were dying. And now a man the size of a barn door stood at her gate like God had sent him. Or the devil had. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you don't look scared enough." She should have pulled the trigger. She didn't. That was her first mistake. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The drought had been killing things long before Caleb Reed showed up. It killed the grass first, then the creek that ran behind Abigail Mercer's property, the one her late husband Daniel used to call God's gift to lazy ranchers. Then it killed 2 of her 6 remaining cattle. She'd found them lying in the dirt near the empty trough, eyes open, tongues swollen. Ethan had helped her drag them past the fence line. He hadn't cried. That worried her more than the dead animals. Abigail stood on the porch now, watching the stranger at the gate, rifle steady, jaw tight. The sun pressed down like a hot iron on everything it touched. "I said you're trespassing," she repeated. The man didn't move. He stood with his hands open at his sides, palms forward, fingers loose. No weapon drawn, no hat tipped. Just watching her, with gray eyes that looked like they'd seen too many things and stopped being surprised. "I heard you the first time," he said. "Then move." "Can't do that, ma'am." "Can't or won't?" "Both." Abigail's finger tightened on the trigger. She'd shot a coyote from this same porch 2 weeks ago. Hadn't hesitated. A man wasn't much different when he wouldn't leave your land. "My name is Caleb Reed," he said. His voice was low, controlled, like a man who'd learned the hard way that volume didn't win arguments. "I'm not here to take anything from you." "Then what are you here for?" He looked past her toward the cabin, toward the sound of Ethan coughing again, deep and rattling. "Your well's failing," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "That's none of your concern." "It is if Victor Hale is the reason it's drying up." The name hit her like a slap. She didn't lower the rifle, but something shifted behind her eyes. Caleb saw it. He'd spent 15 years reading people's faces the moment before they either ran or fought. Abigail Mercer wasn't going to do either. She was going to stand right there and decide whether to trust him or bury him. "How do you know that name?" she asked. "Because I used to work for men like him." Silence. A horsefly buzzed between them. "Used to," Abigail said flatly. "Yes, ma'am." "And now?" Caleb looked at the ground, then back at her. "Now I'm trying to undo what I helped build." Ethan appeared in the doorway behind Abigail. Thin, pale, dark circles under his eyes that no 11-year-old should carry. He looked at Caleb the way stray dogs look at strangers, half hoping, half ready to bolt. "Who's he?" Ethan asked. "Nobody," Abigail said. "He's real big for nobody." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. He caught it before it reached his mouth and pushed it back down where it came from. "Go inside, Ethan," Abigail said. "I ain't tired." "I didn't say you were tired. I said go inside." The boy looked at Caleb one more time, then disappeared behind the door. His cough followed him like a shadow. Abigail exhaled through her nose. The rifle was getting heavy, but she'd die before she showed it. "You've got 30 seconds, she said. "Talk." Caleb nodded once. "Hale's been buying up land along this stretch for 2 years. Water rights, grazing access, mineral claims, everything tied to the railroad expansion coming through next spring. Your husband held one of the last independent water sources in this valley." "Daniel's dead." "I know. Hale knows too. That's why he's moving on you now." Abigail's throat tightened. She swallowed it down. She'd been swallowing things down since she was 15 years old. Fear, grief, anger, the taste of a life she never chose. One more thing wouldn't kill her. "I've met Hale," she said. "He came by 2 months ago with papers. I told him to leave." "And he left?" "He smiled and left." "That's worse," Caleb said. She knew. God help her, she already knew. That night, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with a lamp turned low and Daniel's papers spread out in front of her. Deeds, receipts, letters from the county assessor. A life reduced to ink and signatures. Ethan slept in the next room, his breathing rough and uneven. She'd boiled what little water they had left and pressed a damp cloth to his forehead before he drifted off. He'd held her wrist and whispered, "Are we going to be okay?" She'd lied. Yes. That's what mothers did, even ones who weren't mothers by blood. Ethan wasn't hers. He was the son of a ranch hand named Cole, who died of fever the previous winter. No family came to claim the boy. No one even asked. So Abigail had taken him in, the same way the land had taken her in. Not with warmth, but with the quiet agreement that survival was a shared project. A knock came at the door. She grabbed the rifle again. "It's Reed." "I know who it is. What do you want?" "Your east fence is down. 3 posts snapped clean. Wasn't wind." Abigail opened the door. Caleb stood in the dark, sweat and dust on his shirt, a broken fence post balanced across one shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Someone cut it?" she asked. "Someone wanted you to think cattle knocked it over. But the cuts are too clean. Saw marks." Her stomach dropped. "Hale." "His men. He won't come himself. Men like that never do." She stared at the broken post, at the man holding it, at the darkness beyond him, where her land stretched out silent and threatened. "Why do you care?" she asked. Not angry. Tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and doesn't leave with sleep. Caleb set the post down carefully against the porch railing. He straightened up and looked at her. Not down at her, even though he had a full foot of height on her. He looked at her like she was standing on level ground. "Because I helped a man like Hale burn out a family in Abilene 4 years ago," he said. "Woman and 2 children. I didn't like the match, but I held the horses. I've been carrying that ever since." Abigail searched his face for the lie. She'd gotten good at finding lies. Daniel had been full of them. Small ones that smelled like whiskey and bigger ones that smelled like other women's perfume. But Caleb's face wasn't hiding anything. It was just open. Raw. Like a wound that hadn't scabbed over yet because he wouldn't let it. "That doesn't make you a good man," she said. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." "So what does it make you?" "A man trying to be better than the worst thing he's done." She held his gaze for a long time. The lamp flickered behind her. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called and got no answer. "You can sleep in the barn," she said. "Touch nothing. Come morning, I'll decide if you stay or go." "Fair enough." He turned and walked toward the barn. She watched him until the dark swallowed him whole. Then she locked the door, leaned the rifle against the wall, and pressed both hands flat on the table. Her hands were shaking now. She let them. Morning came hot and mean. By 6, the air was already thick enough to chew. Abigail woke to the sound of hammering. She found Caleb at the east fence, shirtless, driving new posts into the ground with a mallet he'd found in the barn. He'd cut the wood himself. She could see fresh sawdust on the ground around him. His back was a map of old scars, some thin and white, some thick and raised like rope. He heard her boots on the dirt and stopped. "Morning, ma'am." "I didn't ask you to fix that." "No, you didn't." "Then why are you fixing it?" He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "Because it's broken." Ethan came running from the cabin, boots untied, hat crooked. He stopped short when he saw Caleb's scars. His eyes went wide, but he didn't look away. Kids never did. "What happened to your back?" Ethan asked. "Ethan," Abigail started. "Bad decisions," Caleb said simply. He pulled his shirt back on. "Every scar's a lesson I was too stubborn to learn the easy way." "Did they hurt?" "Every one." "Do they still?" Caleb looked at the boy, really looked at him. The hollowed cheeks, the dark eyes, the cough that hadn't let up in weeks. "Some of them," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, like that was the most honest thing anyone had told him in months. Then he pointed at the fence. "Can I help?" Caleb glanced at Abigail. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. And in the language of a woman who'd been deciding everything alone for too long, that silence was permission enough. "Hold this post steady," Caleb said. "Don't let it lean." "I won't." "I know you won't." By noon, Victor Hale's carriage rolled up the main road into town. Black lacquer, brass fittings, 2 horses that looked better fed than half the children in the valley. Ruth Callahan saw it from the window of her supply store and set her jaw. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, wiping her hands on her apron. "The vulture's back." Hale stepped out in a gray suit that had no business being in a town where people patched their clothes with flour sacks. He tipped his hat to 2 women on the sidewalk. They didn't tip back. He walked into the land office like he owned it. He nearly did. "Thomas," he said to Sheriff Garner, who was leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "Hale, I trust the Mercer situation is proceeding?" Garner set the cup down slowly. "There is no Mercer situation. Woman owns her land free and clear." "For now." Hale smiled, the kind of smile that made you check your pockets. "Her husband had debts, Sheriff. Debts transfer." "Daniel Mercer's debts were settled when he died." "Were they?" Hale pulled a folded document from his coat. "Because I have a promissory note here that suggests otherwise. Signed, witnessed, and filed with the county assessor in April." Garner looked at the paper. He looked at Hale. Something sour turned in his stomach. "I'll need to verify this," Garner said. "Of course. Take your time." Hale tucked the paper back into his coat. "But Thomas, time is the one thing Mrs. Mercer doesn't have. That well of hers won't last through August." He left the office without waiting for a reply. The door closed softly behind him. That was the thing about Victor Hale. He never slammed doors. He just made sure they locked behind him. That evening, Ruth Callahan rode out to Abigail's place. She brought 2 gallons of water, a sack of dried beans, and news that tasted worse than both. "He's got a paper saying Daniel owed him money," Ruth said, standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "Promissory note, signed and filed." Abigail sat very still. "Daniel never borrowed money from Hale." "I know that. You know that. But paper don't care about truth, Abigail. Paper only cares about ink." "It's forged." "Probably, but proving it costs money you don't have and time Hale won't give you." Abigail pressed her palms against the table. The same table where she'd eaten silent dinners with a man who drank too much and touched her too little. The same table where she'd signed her own name on the deed after Daniel's heart gave out in the barn. The same table where she'd told Ethan he could stay as long as he wanted and watched the boy cry for the first time since his father died. "I'm not leaving this land," Abigail said. Ruth reached across the table and covered Abigail's hand with hers. "I know you're not, honey. but you can't fight him alone." "I'm not alone. I've got Ethan." "You've got an 11-year-old with a cough that won't quit and a heart bigger than his body. That ain't a soldier. That's a reason to win." They sat in silence. Outside, the sound of hammering drifted from the east fence. Caleb was still working. The man worked like he was trying to build something strong enough to hold back every wrong thing he'd ever done. "Who is he?" Ruth asked, nodding toward the sound. "Says his name is Caleb Reed." "I saw a wanted poster with that name in Garrett's office last month." Abigail's jaw tightened. "I know." Ruth studied her friend's face. "And you let him stay?" "I let him fix a fence. That's not the same as staying." "It's the start of staying, Abigail. You know that." Another long silence. Ethan's cough echoed from the bedroom. "He said he used to work for men like Hale," Abigail said quietly. "Said he's trying to make it right." "And you believe him?" Abigail looked toward the window, toward the sound of a hammer striking wood in steady, even beats, toward a man she didn't trust, couldn't trust, and somehow couldn't send away. "I believe he's the only person who showed up," she said. Ruth squeezed her hand and stood. "Then God help you both, because Victor Hale doesn't lose. Not around here." "Then maybe it's time someone changed that." Ruth looked at her, really looked at her, at the steel in her spine that hadn't been there 6 months ago, at the woman who'd buried a husband she never loved and claimed a son she never bore, and held a piece of land the whole valley wanted to take from her. "Maybe it is," Ruth said softly, and left before her eyes said more than her mouth was ready to. Late that night, Abigail carried a tin cup of water to the barn. She found Caleb sitting on a hay bale, cleaning a revolver by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, set the gun down immediately, moved his hands to his knees where she could see them. She noticed that. The way he always made sure his hands were visible. The way he never stood too close. The way he asked before touching anything that belonged to her. Monsters don't ask permission. She set the cup on the workbench. "Water." "Thank you, ma'am." "Hale's got a forged note claiming Daniel owed him money. He's going to use it to take my land." Caleb picked up the cup, drank slowly, set it down. "When?" he asked. "Soon. Ruth thinks weeks, maybe less." "You have the original deed? Filed and clean. Witnesses to Daniel's debts being settled? Ruth, the general store ledger, and the county clerk, if he hasn't been bought yet." Caleb nodded. "Then we fight it with paper first. If paper fails—" "Paper won't fail," Abigail said firmly, "because I won't let it." He looked at her. In the lamplight, his gray eyes caught gold. Not warm, not soft, but steady. Like a man who'd stopped running and was deciding for the first time in years what he was willing to stand for. "You're tougher than you think you are, Mrs. Mercer." "I know exactly how tough I am, Mr. Reed. That's why I'm still here." She turned and walked back to the cabin. She didn't look back. Caleb watched her go. The straight spine, the certain stride, the way the lamplight from the kitchen window framed her like something worth protecting. He picked up the revolver, checked the chambers, set it on the hay bale beside him. Then he sat in the dark and listened to the silence of a land that was holding its breath, waiting to see who would break first. Nobody was breaking tonight. 3 days passed, and the well gave nothing but dust. Abigail hauled the bucket up for the 4th time that morning and stared at the dry rope, the cracked wood, the empty bottom where water used to be. Ethan stood behind her, holding a tin cup he'd been carrying around like a prayer. "Nothing?" he asked. "Nothing." "What about the creek?" "Creek's been dead since June, Ethan, you know that." The boy looked at the cup in his hands, turned it over, set it on the ground upside down like he was burying something small. Caleb walked up from the east fence, shirt dark with sweat. He looked at the well, looked at Abigail, didn't ask. "I need to go into the shaft," he said. "It's not safe." "Neither is dying of thirst." Abigail's hands tightened on the well rope. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it wasn't his well, wasn't his problem, wasn't his place. But Ethan was standing right there, with cracked lips and a cough that sounded worse every morning, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford to drink. "Fine," she said, "but I hold the rope." Caleb looked at her, all 5'4" of her, 120 pounds soaking wet, which she hadn't been in weeks. "You hold the rope," he agreed. He rigged a harness from barn leather and dropped himself into the shaft. Abigail braced her boots against the well stones and held. Her arms screamed, her back burned. She didn't let go. From below, Caleb's voice echoed up, hollow and strange. "There's water down here, about 8 feet lower than your current line. The aquifer shifted." "Can you reach it?" "I can dig to it. Need 2 days, maybe 3. "We don't have 3 days of water." Silence from the shaft. Then, "I know." She pulled him up. His hands were bleeding where the rock had torn skin. He wiped them on his pants without looking at them. "I'll ride to Ruth's," Abigail said. "She'll give us enough to hold." "I'll come with you." "No." Abigail's voice was sharp. "You've got a wanted poster with your face on it sitting in the sheriff's office. You step foot in town, and this ends before it starts." Caleb's jaw worked. He didn't like it. Every line of his body said he didn't like it. But he nodded. "Take the rifle," he said. "I always take the rifle, Mr. Reed." She saddled her horse and rode out before the argument could grow legs. Ethan watched her go from the porch, then walked to where Caleb was wrapping his hands with strips of cloth. "She's scared," Ethan said. "She's smart. There's a difference." "No, there ain't. Not out here." Caleb stopped wrapping, looked at the boy. 11 years old, and already speaking like a man who'd learned that fear and intelligence lived in the same room. "You're right," Caleb said. "There ain't."
"Are you scared? Of what? Of hail? Of the bounty? Of all of it?"
Caleb finished wrapping his left hand, flexed it, made a fist, and released. "I'm scared of failing her," he said quietly. "That's the only fear that matters right now." Ethan sat down on the porch step. His cough came again, deep and ragged, and he pressed his fist against his chest like he could push it back down. "My pa used to say, 'Fear's just love with nowhere to go,'" the boy said. Caleb looked at him for a long time. "Your pa was a wise man." "My pa's dead." "Wise men usually are. The world don't much care for them." Ethan almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his mouth, but it lived somewhere behind his eyes for a second before it faded. "Don't let her go alone next time," the boy said. "She acts like she don't need nobody. But everybody needs somebody. Even her." Then he went inside and closed the door, and Caleb stood in the heat with his bleeding hands and a boy's words ringing louder than any sermon he'd ever heard. Abigail reached town by mid-morning. The streets were quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday. She tied her horse outside Ruth's supply store and pushed through the door. Ruth was behind the counter, but she wasn't alone. A man Abigail had never seen before sat in the corner chair. Tall, lean, leather duster despite the heat, a badge pinned to his vest that wasn't local. "Abigail," Ruth said. Her voice was careful, measured. The voice she used when she was trying to tell you something without saying it. "This is Marshal Dunnigan. He's passing through." Abigail looked at the man. He looked back with pale eyes that catalogued everything: her boots, her posture, the calluses on her trigger hand. "Ma'am," Dunnigan said. He didn't stand. Marshal? I'm looking for a man named Caleb Reed. Large fellow.
Would have come through this area in the last week or so.
Abigail's pulse hammered in her throat. She swallowed it down. Her face gave nothing. Can't say I know the name, she said. Ruth handed her a water jug from behind the counter. Their fingers touched. Ruth squeezed once. A warning. Reed's wanted for assault and suspected homicide out of Abilene, Dunnigan continued. $300 reward. Dangerous man, by all accounts. Lots of dangerous men in this valley, Marshal. Most of them wear suits instead of spurs. Dunnigan's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. Just enough to tell her he'd caught the edge in her voice and filed it away. You live alone, Mrs. Mercer, and whether I live alone is my business. Just looking out for your safety, ma'am. My safety is a Winchester rifle and a locked door. I appreciate the concern. She took the water jug, nodded to Ruth, and walked out. Her hands didn't shake until she reached the horse. She pressed them flat against the saddle until they stopped. Behind her, the supply store door opened. Ruth came out fast, wiping her hands on her apron. He's been asking all over town, Ruth whispered. Garrett at the land office, Jenkins at the livery, even old Mrs. Patterson. Does he know? Not yet, but Abigail, this town ain't big on secrets, and a man Caleb's size don't exactly blend in. How long is the marshal staying? Didn't say, but he's taken a room at the boarding house. That means more than a day. Abigail closed her eyes. The heat pressed against her eyelids like a brand. I need more water, Ruth. Enough for a week. I'll load the wagon tonight and bring it out myself. Less attention that way. Thank you. Ruth grabbed her arm. Abigail, that man in your barn, whatever he is, whatever he's done, if Dunnigan finds him on your property, you lose everything. The land, Ethan, all of it.
Harboring a fugitive ain't something a widow survives in this county.
I know. Then what are you going to do? Abigail untied her horse, swung into the saddle, looked down at the one friend she had left in this valley. I'm going to find out the truth, she said. About Caleb, about Hale, about all of it. And then I'm going to decide. She rode out of town without looking back. The marshal watched from the boarding house window. He wrote something in a small leather notebook and closed it. Abigail pushed the horse hard going home. She came through the gate at a gallop and found Caleb in the well shaft, shirtless, digging with a pickaxe. She stood at the edge and looked down at him. Get out, she said. Something in her voice made him stop. He climbed up without a word. She stood in front of him, breathing hard from the ride, dust on her face, fury in her eyes. A marshal named Dunnigan is in town looking for you. Assault and suspected homicide. $300. Caleb didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't make excuses. He just stood there and took it, like a man standing in front of a firing squad who'd already made peace with the bullet. I know, he said. You know? You came to my land, where I have a child, knowing a federal marshal could ride up any day? He ain't federal. He's a bounty hunter with a purchased badge. There's a difference. Not to me there ain't. Not when he's sitting in Ruth's store, asking questions with my name in his mouth. Caleb took a step back, not from fear, from respect, giving her space to be angry, because she'd earned it. The charge in Abilene, he said slowly. The man I'm accused of killing was named Prentice. He worked for a land company. Same kind of outfit as Hale's. He came to burn out a family, woman named Sarah Dawes and her 2 girls. I was supposed to help. And I said no. He pulled on me. I put him down. Self-defense. That's the truth of it. But truth don't pay bounties. Prentice's employer filed the warrant. Paid for Dunnigan personally. Who's the employer? Caleb looked at her steady. Western Continental Land Trust. Victor Hale is the regional director. The words landed between them like a stone in still water.
Hale sent the bounty hunter, Abigail said. Hale sent the bounty hunter.
Because you refused to burn that family.
Because I refused. And because I know how he operates. I've seen the forged documents, the bribed assessors, the wells that mysteriously go dry when landowners won't sell.
Abigail's legs went weak. She locked her knees and refused to show it.
My well, she whispered. I can't prove it yet. But when I was digging down there, I found something. The rock face below your waterline has fresh chisel marks. Someone diverted the underground flow. That takes money and knowledge of the aquifer. That takes Hale.
She put her hand on the well stone to steady herself. Her world, which had already been small and hard and barely survivable, had just gotten smaller and harder. If I turn you in, she said, the marshal leaves. Hale loses his leverage over you. But I lose the only person who knows what he's doing. That's about the size of it. And if I don't turn you in, I'm harboring a fugitive. I could lose my land. I could lose Ethan. Yes. She stared at him, at the scars on his hands, at the sweat and rock dust on his face, at the gray eyes that hadn't looked away from hers once. Did you kill that man in self-defense, Caleb Reed? I need you to look at me and tell me the truth. Not the convenient truth, not the version that keeps you alive. The real truth. He drew first. He meant to kill me. I was faster. That's all there is.
Swear it.
On what?
On whatever you've got left that matters.
Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I swear on the grave of Sarah Dawes' youngest girl. She was 6. Her name was Emma. She had red hair and a gap in her teeth. I carried her out of that house before Prentice could touch her. I swear on her. Abigail's eyes burned. She blinked hard.
Then you stay, she said. God help me, you stay.
That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with Daniel's papers again, searching for anything. A letter, a receipt, a scrap that could connect Hale to her husband. Daniel had been a weak man, a drinking man, the kind of man who signed things he shouldn't have and forgot promises he'd made. She'd married him at 16 because her father had arranged it, and she'd buried him at 25 because his heart quit on him the way he'd quit on everything else. She found it at the bottom of the stack, a letter, half-written, in Daniel's shaky hand. To whom it may concern, Victor Hale approached me on March 14th regarding water rights transfer. I refused to sign. He said he would acquire the rights regardless. I believe he intends to. The letter stopped there, unfinished, unsigned. Daniel must have started it and given up, the way he gave up on everything. But it was something, a dead man's almost testimony. She pressed the letter flat on the table, held it there with both hands like it might fly away. You sorry fool, she whispered to her dead husband. You almost did one good thing. Morning. Caleb emerged from the barn to find Ethan sitting on the fence rail, watching him. Abigail says you're staying, the boy said. For now. She also says there's a man in town looking for you. Caleb stopped walking. She told you that? She didn't have to. I heard her yelling last night. These walls ain't thick. You shouldn't worry about. I ain't worried. Ethan jumped down from the fence. I'm asking. Are you going to run? No. You promise? I don't make promises, Ethan. Promises are just words people use to make themselves feel better about leaving. Then what do you give? Work. That's all I've got. Ethan thought about this, nodded once, then walked to the well and picked up a shovel that was almost as tall as he was. Then let's work, he said. Caleb looked at the boy, Thin arms, bony shoulders, eyes old enough to vote, and a body still too young to shave. Something cracked in Caleb's chest, not breaking, but shifting, like ice giving way to moving water underneath. "Yeah," he said. "Let's work." They dug together. Caleb did the heavy breaking, while Ethan hauled loose rock in a bucket. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The rhythm of the work said everything. Two people who'd lost their fathers in different ways, building something together because the alternative was standing still. And standing still in this valley meant dying. By afternoon, Caleb hit moisture. Dark, wet earth that smelled like iron and life. "Water!" Ethan shouted up from the shaft. "Caleb, there's water!" Abigail came running from the cabin. She dropped to her knees at the well edge and looked down. Caleb was standing thigh-deep in mud, grinning, actually grinning, and Ethan was beside him, covered in dirt from head to boots, holding up a handful of wet clay like it was gold. "It's coming through," Caleb called up. "Give it a day to fill. You'll have water by morning." Abigail pressed her hand over her mouth. She didn't cry. She absolutely did not cry. But her shoulders shook once, hard, and she turned away before either of them could see her face. She walked to the porch, sat down on the step, pressed her hands together between her knees, and breathed. Ruth's wagon came rattling up the road an hour later, water barrels in the back. But Ruth's face carried something heavier than water. "Hale filed the debt claim this morning," Ruth said, climbing down. "Sheriff Garner accepted it for review. You've got 30 days to dispute it, or he can petition for seizure." 30 days. Maybe less. Hale's got a judge in his pocket down in Larson City. He could push for expedited review. Abigail stood. "Then I push back." She went inside and came out with Daniel's unfinished letter. Ruth read it again, looked up. "This isn't signed, Abigail." "It's his handwriting, Ruth. You know his handwriting. You saw every receipt he ever signed at your store." "I know it's his, but a judge might not, and Hale's lawyer will tear it apart." "Then we find more. Daniel was lazy, not stupid. If Hale pressured him, there'll be something else. A ledger entry, a witness, something." Ruth folded the letter carefully. "I'll check my store records. See if Daniel ever mentioned Hale in any purchases or credit agreements." "Thank you. And Abigail?" "What?" Ruth lowered her voice. "Dunnigan hired a horse from Jenkins this morning. Asked for directions to every ranch and homestead within 10 miles. He's making rounds." The blood drained from Abigail's face. "How long before he gets here?" "Tomorrow. Day after at most." Abigail walked to the barn. Caleb was cleaning tools. She didn't ease into it. "The bounty hunter is riding to every homestead in the valley. He'll be here inside 2 days." Caleb set the tool down. "I can leave tonight," he said. "Draw him away. Circle back once he's gone." "And if he doesn't go? If he waits?" "Then I keep running. It's what I've been doing." "No," Abigail crossed her arms. "Running is what got you here. And here is where you're needed." "If he finds me here, then we deal with it here. On my land. On my terms." Caleb studied her. The set of her jaw. The steel in her spine. She'd grown taller since he'd met her. Not in inches. In something else. Something you couldn't measure with a tape, but could feel from across a room. "You're asking me to stay and fight," he said. "I'm telling you, there's a difference." He picked the tool back up, turned it in his hands, set it down again. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "There is." That night, Abigail sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees. Caleb sat on the barn steps, 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to be proper. "Tell me about Abilene," she said into the dark. He was quiet for a long time. What do you want to know?
Everything. If Dunnigan comes, I need to know what I'm defending. So he told her. Not the cleaned-up version, not the one that made him look better. The whole ugly truth. How he'd drifted into enforcement work after the war. How he'd strong-armed settlers for land companies because the pay was steady and the questions were easy to ignore. How he'd stood outside Sarah Dawes's house with a torch in his hand and looked through the window and seen a little girl with red hair sitting at a kitchen table, drawing pictures with a charcoal stick. I couldn't do it, he said. Threw the torch in the dirt. Prentice called me a coward. I told him we were done. He went for his gun.
And you were faster. I've always been faster. That ain't a gift. It's a punishment. Sarah Dawes, the little girl, what happened to them? I put them on a stage to Fort Worth, gave them every dollar I had. Last I heard, Sarah's sister took them in. Abigail was quiet. The night pressed close around them. You're not the man on that poster, she said. I'm exactly the man on that poster, Mrs. Mercer. I just chose different the one time it mattered. One time is enough. He looked at her across the dark. She looked back. Two people sitting on opposite sides of 20 feet and a whole lifetime of damage, trying to figure out if trust was something they could afford. Get some sleep, Mr. Reed, Abigail said. Tomorrow we dig deeper. She went inside, locked the door, leaned against it. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, from something worse, something she hadn't felt since before Daniel, something she'd sworn she'd never be stupid enough to feel again. She pressed her palm flat against her chest and whispered, "Don't." Then she blew out the lamp and lay down in the dark, listening to the silence where water used to flow, and the man she barely knew slept in her barn with his sins and his scars and his steady, steady hands. Dunnigan came on a Thursday. Abigail heard the hoofbeats before she saw him. She was hauling the first clean bucket of water from the restored well, water that Caleb had bled for, water that tasted like iron and survival, when the sound of a single horse coming up the road turned her blood to ice. She set the bucket down, wiped her hands on her skirt, walked to the porch, and picked up the rifle. Caleb was in the barn. She couldn't warn him without drawing attention, so she did the only thing she could. She stepped off the porch and walked toward the gate, putting herself between the rider and everything behind her. Dunnigan pulled up slow, tipped his hat. That purchased badge caught the sun and threw light in her eyes. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "We met at Mrs. Callahan's store." "I remember." "Mind if I water my horse?" "Trough's dry." "That's a shame." He didn't dismount, just sat there, scanning the property with those pale, cataloging eyes. The barn, the fence, the fresh-cut posts along the east line that no woman and sick child could have driven alone. "Nice fence work," he said. "I manage." "I'm sure you do." He shifted in the saddle. "I'll be direct, ma'am. I'm tracking a man named Caleb Reed. Big fellow, hard to miss. Some folks in town say they saw a stranger matching his description heading out this direction about a week ago." Folks in town say a lot of things. Most of it's gossip, and the rest is boredom. This ain't gossip, Mrs. Mercer. Reed is wanted for killing a man in Abilene. I've got a warrant and a commission to bring him in. Then I wish you luck finding him. Somewhere else. Dunnigan's jaw tightened. He looked at the barn again, at the fresh sawdust near the door, at the second set of boot prints in the dust, prints too large for any woman. "You live alone out here?" he asked. "I've got a boy, Ethan. No hired hands? No drifters passing through?" "Marshal, I can barely keep a child fed.
You think I'm feeding drifters?" He studied her face, the way a man studies a locked door, looking for the weak hinge. Abigail gave him nothing. She'd learned that skill from Daniel. Not the drinking, not the lying, but the silence. The ability to stand perfectly still while your insides screamed. "I'll be staying in town a while longer," Dunnigan said. "If you see anything, hear anything, a man that size leaves tracks. If I see a fugitive on my property, I'll handle it myself. That's what the rifle's for." Something flickered across Dunnigan's face. Respect, maybe? Or suspicion, wearing the same clothes. "Ma'am?" He tipped his hat again and turned the horse. Abigail didn't move until he was a quarter-mile down the road. Then her knees buckled, and she grabbed the fence post to keep from hitting the ground. Caleb appeared at the barn door. He'd heard everything. She could tell by the way he stood. Coiled, controlled, every muscle in his body ready for something that hadn't happened yet. "He'll be back," Caleb said. "I know." The boot prints, Abigail. He saw them. First time he'd used her given name. She noticed, filed it away in the place where she kept dangerous things. "Then we need to give him a reason for them," she said. "Ruth's nephew, Thomas, is about your height. I'll tell Dunnigan I hired him for well work." "Thomas Callahan is in Abilene." "Dunnigan doesn't know that." Caleb shook his head. "You're building lies on top of lies. That's a house that always falls." "Then give me a better plan." He was quiet. She watched the war behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to run, pulling against the part of him that had promised a boy with a cough that he'd stay and work. "We go to the county clerk," Caleb said. "I turn myself in, present the self-defense evidence, end this clean." "And if the clerk is bought? If Hale's money reaches the judge before your testimony does?" "Then at least you're clear. No harboring charge. No risk to Ethan." "And you hang." "Maybe." "No!" Abigail's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't get to walk onto my land, fix my well, teach my boy to swing a hammer, and then hang. That's not how this works." "How does it work, then?" "We prove Hale hired Dunnigan. We prove the warrant is purchased, not lawful. We break the whole thing open." "With what evidence?" Abigail reached into her apron pocket and pulled out Daniel's unfinished letter. "With this, and whatever else we find. Ruth's pulling store records. If Daniel mentioned Hale even once in a transaction, we've got a pattern. A pattern isn't proof. A pattern is the beginning of proof, and the beginning is all we need to make a judge look twice." Caleb took the letter, read it. His eyes moved over Daniel's shaky handwriting, and she watched his face change. Not softening, exactly, but shifting. Like he was seeing her dead husband not as a failure, but as a man who'd tried, once, to do the right thing, and run out of courage before he finished. "He was scared," Caleb said. "He was always scared. That was Daniel's whole problem. Good instincts. No spine. Takes spine to start a letter like this. Takes more spine to finish it." He handed it back. Their fingers touched. Neither of them pulled away fast enough. "I'll finish it," Abigail said. "What Daniel started, I'll finish." 2 hours later, Ruth rode up in her wagon with a stack of ledgers and a face that said the news was both good and bad. "Found something," Ruth said, spreading a ledger across Abigail's kitchen table. "April of last year. Daniel came into the store and bought a padlock. Paid cash, which he never did. I asked why, and he said, I remember this clear as day. He said, I need to lock something up before Hale finds it." "Lock what up?" "That's what I asked. He wouldn't say. Just took the padlock and left." Abigail looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the cabin. At the floorboards. At the walls. "Did Daniel have a strongbox?" he asked. "Not that I know of," Abigail said. "He barely had a savings." A padlock means something to lock. Something he didn't want found. They searched. Caleb checked the barn, every beam, every stall, every loose board. Abigail went through the cabin inch by inch. Ethan crawled under the porch with a lantern. It was Ethan who found it. "There's a box under here," the boy shouted, his voice muffled by dust and wood. "Nailed to the underside of the floorboards."
Caleb pulled the porch boards up with his bare hands. Underneath, bolted to a crossbeam, sat a tin strongbox with a padlock on it. Ruth's padlock. The one Daniel bought, with cash he never had. Abigail's hands trembled as Caleb broke the lock with a pry bar. Inside the box, 3 documents. A surveyor's report showing Hale's water diversion plan, dated 6 months before the well went dry. A signed affidavit from a surveyor named Pemberton, stating he'd been paid by Western Continental Land Trust to falsify property boundaries. And a letter from Hale to Daniel, offering $500 for the water rights, with a final line that read, "Refusal will be met with appropriate measures." Ruth read the letter aloud. Her voice shook. "Appropriate measures," she repeated. "That's a threat. A written, signed threat." "It's more than that," Caleb said. "The surveyor's affidavit proves Hale paid to divert the water. The falsified boundaries prove he's been stealing land across the valley. And the letter proves he pressured Daniel directly." Abigail held the documents against her chest. Her dead husband, the drunk, the liar, the man who never finished anything, had hidden the one thing that could save her. "You sorry, beautiful fool," she whispered. And this time, she meant it different. "We need to get these to a judge," Ruth said. "Not the one in Larson City. He's in Hale's pocket. We need the circuit judge out of Fort Sully, Judge Whitfield. He's honest." "Fort Sully is 2 days' ride," Abigail said. "I'll go," Caleb said. "With a bounty on your head? You won't make it past the county line." "I will if Dunnigan doesn't know I've left." "And how do you plan to manage that?" Caleb looked at Ethan. The boy looked back. Something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. The kind that lives between people who've already decided to trust each other and are just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "I ride at night," Caleb said. "Through the back canyons. Stay off the main road. I can make Fort Sully in a day and a half if I push hard. And if Dunnigan comes back while you're gone? Then you show him nothing. Tell him nothing. Lock the documents in the barn and act like a widow with nothing to hide." "I am a widow with nothing to hide." "Then it should be easy." She didn't smile, but something moved behind her eyes that lived in the same territory as a smile, and Caleb saw it, and it hit him harder than any bullet ever had. He left that night. Abigail watched him ride out from the porch, the horse picking its way through the dark. He didn't look back. Men who look back are men who aren't sure. Caleb was sure. Ethan stood beside her. "He's coming back," the boy said. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do. He left his tools." Abigail looked at the boy. "What?" "A man who's running don't leave his tools. He left the pickaxe, the pry bar, and that good hammer he sharpened yesterday. A man leaves his tools. He's coming back for them." Something broke open in Abigail's chest, not breaking apart, breaking through, like water pushing past stone. "Get inside," she said softly. "It's late." "Yes, ma'am." Morning came, and Dunnigan came with it. This time, he brought company. A deputy, or a man dressed like one, thick-necked and silent, carrying a shotgun across his saddle. "Mrs. Mercer," Dunnigan called from the gate. "I need to search your property." Abigail stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, Ethan behind the door. "You got a warrant?" "I've got authority." "Authority ain't a warrant, Marshal. Even out here, the law still has paperwork." Dunnigan's face hardened. "A man fitting Reed's description was seen on the North Road 3 nights ago. Trail leads this direction. I'm asking politely, and I'm refusing politely. Come back with a warrant signed by a judge, and I'll open every door on this property. Until then, you're trespassing." The deputy shifted his grip on the shotgun. Abigail's thumb moved to the rifle hammer. The click echoed in the silence between them. "You don't want to do this, ma'am," Dunnigan said quietly. "You're right. I don't. But I will." Dunnigan stared at her for a long 10 seconds. Then he turned to the deputy. "Let's go." "But I said, let's go." They rode off. Abigail's legs gave out the moment they cleared the gate. She sat down hard on the porch step and pressed the rifle across her knees with both hands to stop them from shaking. Ethan opened the door. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." "Ethan, I swear to God." "I know. Go inside." He sat down next to her instead, his thin shoulder pressed against her arm. He didn't say anything else. He just sat there, being solid, being present, being the small, steady weight that kept her from flying apart. An hour later, a black carriage rolled up the road. Victor Hale stepped out in a linen suit, white as paper, without a wrinkle. He walked to the gate with the ease of a man who owned the ground under everyone else's feet. He didn't knock. He leaned on the fence and waited. Abigail walked out to meet him. No rifle this time. Hale was the kind of man who used other people's weapons. Carrying a gun to meet him would be like bringing a knife to an argument. "Mrs. Mercer," Hale said pleasantly, "you look well, considering." "Considering what?" "Considering the circumstances. Failing well. Mounting debts. A marshal sniffing around your property." He shook his head with theatrical sympathy. "It's a hard life for a woman alone." "I ain't alone." "The boy? Yes, admirable. But a child isn't a defense, Mrs. Mercer. A child is a vulnerability." The way he said it made her stomach turn. Not a threat exactly. Worse. An observation. Like he was describing the weather. "What do you want, Hale?" "The same thing I've always wanted. A fair transaction. Your water rights for a generous sum. Enough to start fresh, somewhere kinder. My water rights aren't for sale." "Everything is for sale, Mrs. Mercer. The question is simply price." "Then you can't afford me." Hale's smile didn't waver. It never did. That was the most frightening thing about him. The smile that stayed, no matter what lived behind it. "I've filed the debt claim," he said. "Your husband's promissory note is on record. 30 days to dispute it. After that, this land and everything on it becomes my legal property. That note is forged, and you know it." "I know nothing of the kind, but I appreciate your passion." He straightened his cuffs. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Mercer. I don't enjoy this. I'm a businessman, not a villain. But business requires efficiency, and your resistance is inefficient. Then maybe you should get used to inefficiency." "Perhaps." He turned to go, then stopped, looked back over his shoulder. "One more thing. The man you've been sheltering, Caleb Reed. Dunnigan will find him. It's only a matter of time. And when he does, any hope you have of keeping this land, that boy, or your freedom, will disappear entirely." He climbed into the carriage, closed the door. The driver snapped the reins. The black carriage rolled away quiet as a coffin on wheels. Abigail stood at the gate until it disappeared. Then she walked to the barn, opened the door, and screamed. Once. Hard. Into the empty dark where Caleb's bedroll still lay on the hay bale, and his tools still leaned against the wall. She screamed until her throat burned. Then she wiped her face with both hands and walked back to the cabin. Ethan was at the table, writing something on a piece of paper. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a list of everything Hale said, in case we need it later." She looked at the boy, 11 years old, writing testimony at a kitchen table because the adults in his world couldn't keep him safe enough to just be a child. "That's smart, Ethan. My pa always said write things down. People lie, but paper remembers." She put her hand on his head. He leaned into it, just for a second. Then he went back to writing. 2 days. Caleb had been gone 2 days. No word. No sign. The road stayed empty, and the nights stayed long, and Abigail lay in the dark, counting hours like they were coins she couldn't afford to spend. On the third morning, Ruth rode in fast. Her horse was lathered. Her face was white. "Dunnigan found tracks," Ruth gasped, barely off the horse. "South, toward Fort Sully. He rode out an hour ago with 3 men. They know where Caleb's headed." Abigail's blood went cold. 3 men? Hale's men, armed. Dunnigan deputized them on the spot. "That's not legal." "Legal died in this valley the day Hale arrived, Abigail. You know that." Abigail grabbed Ruth's shoulders. "How far ahead is Caleb?" "Half a day, maybe less. If they ride hard, they'll catch him before he reaches the judge." She turned toward the barn. Ruth grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "I'm riding to Fort Sully." "You can't outrun 4 armed men." "I'm not going to outrun them. I'm going to beat them." Abigail pulled free. "There's a cutoff through Miller's Canyon. Daniel showed me years ago. Shaves 6 hours off the main road. Dunnigan doesn't know it. Hale's men don't know it." "It's dangerous, Abigail. That canyon floods in." "It hasn't rained in 3 months, Ruth. The canyon is dry as bone." "And Ethan?" Abigail stopped, looked back at the cabin, at the boy's face in the window, watching her with eyes that already knew. "You stay with him," Abigail said. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me or Caleb." "Abigail, promise me." Ruth's eyes filled. She grabbed Abigail's hand and squeezed hard enough to bruise. "I promise. Now go." Abigail saddled her horse in 2 minutes flat. She shoved the documents, the surveyor's affidavit, the falsified boundaries, Hale's threatening letter, into a leather satchel and strapped it across her chest. Ethan ran out of the cabin. "Take me with you." "No." "I can ride. You know I can ride." "Ethan." She knelt in front of him, put both hands on his face. "I need you here. I need you to be brave and stay with Ruth and keep this land standing until I get back. Can you do that?" His chin trembled. His eyes were wet, but he nodded. "I can do that." "I know you can." She kissed his forehead. "I know you can." She mounted the horse and rode out hard, south toward Miller's Canyon, with everything that mattered strapped to her chest and everything she loved standing in the dust behind her, watching her go. Ruth put her arm around Ethan's shoulder. The boy didn't cry. He watched until Abigail was a speck on the horizon. Then he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and said, "She's coming back." "I know, honey. She has to. She didn't say goodbye." Ruth held him tighter. "People who say goodbye," Ethan said quietly, "don't always come back. My pa said goodbye. She didn't. That means she's coming back." Ruth pressed her face against the boy's hair and let her tears fall where he couldn't see them. The canyon was everything Daniel had promised and everything Abigail feared. Narrow, steep, rock walls that pressed close enough to scrape her knees. But dry, bone dry, and fast. The horse found its footing on the hard-packed floor and ran like it knew something was at stake. She rode through the night, didn't stop, didn't eat, drank from a canteen Ruth had pressed into her hands at the last second. Her thighs cramped, her back screamed. She held the satchel against her chest with one hand and the reins with the other, and she rode. Somewhere ahead, Caleb was riding toward Fort Sully with nothing but his word and his scars. Somewhere behind him, 4 armed men were closing the gap. And somewhere between them, in a canyon carved by water that no longer flowed, a widow who'd been told her whole life that she wasn't enough was riding harder than she ever had to prove every single one of them wrong. She broke out of the canyon at dawn. Fort Sully sat in the valley below, smoke rising from morning fires, the courthouse just visible at the center of town. And on the road ahead, 300 yards out, Caleb's horse stood riderless at the edge of the trail. Abigail's heart stopped. She spurred forward and found him on the ground beside the road. Not dead, not yet. But his shirt was dark with blood on the left side, and his breathing came in short, ugly gasps. "Caleb!" She dropped from the horse and pressed her hands against the wound. Warm, wet, too much. His eyes opened, focused on her face, confused. "Abigail, how—" "Shut up, don't talk. They caught up to me at the ridge, one of Hale's men. Got a shot off before I said shut up." Her hands pressed harder. Blood pushed through her fingers. "The documents," he said. "Did you bring them?" She looked at him, at the gray eyes going glassy, at the blood soaking into dust, at the man who'd ridden 2 days with a target on his back to deliver justice for a woman he'd known less than 2 weeks. "I brought them," she said. "I brought everything." "Then go. The judge, Whitfield. Morning session starts at 8. "I'm not leaving you here to bleed out on the road." "Abigail." His hand found her wrist, gripped it with strength that shouldn't have been possible for a man losing this much blood. "If those documents don't reach that judge, Hale wins. He takes your land. He takes Ethan's home. Everything we fought for dies right here in this dirt." "You're not dying in this dirt." "Then go fast and come back faster." She looked at the town, at the courthouse, at the blood on her hands. Then she tore a strip from her petticoat, packed the wound tight, and wrapped it hard enough to make him grunt. "Don't you die," she said. "That's not a request, Caleb Reed. That's an order." "Yes, ma'am." She rode for Fort Sully with blood on her hands and fire in her chest, and the taste of something in her mouth that might have been fear or might have been love. And she couldn't tell the difference anymore, and she didn't care. Abigail hit the courthouse steps with blood still drying on her hands, and her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through bone. A clerk in a pressed vest stepped back when he saw her. Wild-eyed, dust-caked, a leather satchel clutched to her chest, like it held the last breath of the world. "Judge Whitfield," she said. "Where?" "Ma'am, court doesn't convene until—" "Where?" The clerk pointed down the hall. Abigail was already moving. She found the judge in his chambers, a silver-haired man with reading spectacles perched on the end of his nose, reviewing case files over a cup of coffee that still had steam rising from it. He looked up when she burst through the door, and his hand moved instinctively toward the desk drawer where he kept a derringer. "My name is Abigail Mercer," she said. "I own land in Sutter Valley. A man named Victor Hale is trying to steal it. I have proof. And the man who helped me get it is bleeding to death on the road outside your town." Whitfield removed his spectacles. Slowly, carefully, the way a man does when he's deciding whether the person in front of him is desperate or dangerous. "Sit down, Mrs. Mercer." "I'll stand." "Then talk." She opened the satchel and laid everything on his desk. The surveyor's affidavit, the falsified boundary report, Hale's threatening letter to Daniel, Daniel's unfinished testimony. She put each document down with hands that shook but didn't stop. Whitfield read. He read the way judges read, slowly, twice, with his finger tracing the lines and his face giving nothing away. Abigail stood there dripping sweat onto his floor and counting the seconds in her head, because every second she spent in this room was a second Caleb was lying on that road, losing blood. "This surveyor," Whitfield said, tapping the affidavit. "Pemberton. He signed this willingly?" "I don't know, sir. I found these documents hidden under my porch. My late husband put them there before he died." "Your husband knew about Hale's operation?" "My husband was pressured by Hale to sell water rights. He refused. He gathered what proof he could. He died before he could do anything with it." "Died how?" "His heart. But I wonder now if the stress of what Hale was doing—" She stopped, swallowed. "That's speculation. I'm giving you facts." Whitfield looked at her over the documents. "You said there's a man bleeding on the road." "Caleb Reed." "He was riding to bring you these documents. Hale's men shot him before he could reach town." "Caleb Reed." Whitfield's eyes sharpened. "There's a warrant for that name." "A purchased warrant. Paid for by Western Continental Land Trust, Hale's company. The man Reed killed in Abilene was a land company enforcer who tried to burn out a family. Reed stopped him. Hale filed the warrant as retaliation." "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Mercer." "That's a serious pile of evidence on your desk, Judge." Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the door, and called down the hall. "Deputy Collins, get the doctor. There's an injured man on the North Road. Bring him in alive." He turned back to Abigail. "And send a rider to Sutter Valley. I want Victor Hale and a marshal named Dunnigan detained for questioning." Abigail's knees buckled. She caught the edge of the desk. "Sit down, Mrs. Mercer," Whitfield said again, quieter this time. This time, she sat. The doctor found Caleb exactly where Abigail had left him, propped against a rock, with the petticoat bandage soaked through, and his face the color of old ash. He'd lost enough blood to kill a smaller man, but Caleb Reed had never been a smaller man in any sense of the word. And when the doctor pressed fingers to his neck, the pulse was there, faint, stubborn, refusing to quit the way stubborn things do. They brought him into town on a flatbed wagon. Abigail was waiting outside the doctor's office when they carried him in. He was unconscious, his shirt cut away, the wound open and ugly on his left side. She saw the bullet hadn't gone deep. It had carved a channel through muscle and grazed the rib, but missed the lung, missed the gut, missed everything that would have made this story end different. "He's lucky," the doctor said. "He's not lucky," Abigail said. "He's stubborn. There's a difference." She sat outside the doctor's office for 3 hours, didn't eat, didn't move. A woman from the boarding house brought her water. She drank it without tasting it. When the doctor finally opened the door, his sleeves were rolled up and his apron was stained. "He's awake," he said, "and asking for you, which I take as a sign of either recovery or delirium." Abigail pushed past him. Caleb lay on a cot, shirtless, his torso wrapped in clean white bandages. His face was drawn, his lips cracked, but his eyes were open and clear and fixed on the door, like he'd been counting her footsteps down the hall. "You made it," he said. His voice sounded like gravel dragged across iron. "I made it." "The judge?" "He's got everything. The affidavit, the boundaries, Hale's letter. He's sending men to Sutter Valley to detain Hale." Caleb closed his eyes. Not sleeping,
just releasing something he'd been holding so tight it had left marks. Abigail. What? You rode through Miller's Canyon, alone, at night. I did. That canyon's killed men on horseback in daylight.
Well, I'm not a man, and it wasn't daylight. His mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him since the day he showed up at her gate. You're the most terrifying woman I've ever met, he said. Good. Remember that. She sat in the chair beside his cot. She didn't reach for his hand. He didn't reach for hers. They just sat in the same room, breathing the same air, letting the silence hold everything their words couldn't carry. Yet. Back in Cedar Valley, things moved fast. Ruth saw the riders first, 2 deputies from Fort Sully, plus a federal marshal who'd been passing through on circuit and got pulled in by Whitfield's authority. They rode into town at midday, and within an hour, the whole valley knew something had shifted. Dunnigan was in the saloon when they found him. He reached for his sidearm. The federal marshal, a lean man named Harker, with 30 years and 0 patience, shook his head once. Don't, Harker said. Dunnigan looked at the badge, the real one, federal. Looked at the 2 deputies flanking the door. Looked at the hand he'd put on his gun, and slowly moved it away. I've got a valid warrant, Dunnigan said. You've got a purchase commission from a land trust under investigation for fraud, property theft, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of legal water rights, Harker said. That ain't a warrant. That's a receipt. They took his badge, his gun, his horse, put him in the back room of the sheriff's office, and locked the door. Victor Hale was harder. They found him at the boarding house, packing a valise. Not running. Hale didn't run. He repositioned. He calculated. He adjusted. Running was for men who'd lost. Hale never considered that he'd lost anything. Gentlemen, he said when the deputies entered, I trust there's an explanation. Judge Whitfield has issued a detention order pending investigation into forged property documents, illegal water diversion, and conspiracy to file false debt claims, the first deputy said. Hale set the valise down. Slowly. The way a man sets down a weapon he intends to pick up later. This is a misunderstanding, he said. I have attorneys who can... Your attorneys can meet you in Fort Sully. Let's go. For the first time in anyone's memory, Victor Hale's smile disappeared. Not all at once. It died in stages, the corners first, then the eyes, then the careful architecture of confidence that held the whole thing together. What was left underneath wasn't anger. It was calculation. Pure, cold arithmetic. The look of a man figuring out exactly what this was going to cost, and who was going to pay. I'll come willingly, Hale said, but I want it noted that I cooperated. Noted, Harker said. And he didn't mean it. And Hale knew it. And they both understood that some battles are lost the moment the other side stops smiling. Ruth brought the news to Abigail's ranch, where Ethan had been waiting on the porch for 2 days straight, sleeping in the chair with a blanket Ruth had draped over him each night. They arrested him, Ruth said, breathless from riding hard. Hale's in custody. Dunnigan, too. Ethan stood up so fast, the blanket fell. And Abigail? Where's Abigail? She's in Fort Sully, hummy. She's safe. And Caleb? Ruth paused, just a beat too long. He's hurt, she said carefully. But he's alive. The doctor's tending to him. Ethan's face did something that no 11-year-old's face should have to do. It cycled through fear, relief, anger, and something older and deeper that didn't have a name. The expression of a child who'd already lost one father and wasn't sure his heart could survive the almost losing of whatever Caleb had become to him. I want to go, Ethan said. Honey, Fort Sully's a full day's ride. I don't care. I want to go. Ruth looked at the boy, at the jaw set hard as county stone, at the eyes that burned with a fierceness she recognized because she'd seen it in his mother's face years ago, before the woman had died of fever and left a hole in the world shaped exactly like this stubborn, beautiful child. "All right," Ruth said. "We leave at first light." In Fort Sully, the legal machinery ground forward. Judge Whitfield convened a preliminary hearing the following morning. Abigail testified for 2 hours. She told them everything. Daniel's drinking, his weakness, the pressure from Hale, the documents hidden under the porch, the well going dry, Caleb's arrival, the forged promissory note. The county clerk from Sutter Valley, a nervous man named Pettigrew, who'd been quietly terrified of Hale for 3 years, finally found his courage when he saw the federal badge. He testified that Hale had pressured him to file false documents on at least 4 properties, that the promissory note against Daniel Mercer's estate had appeared in his office without proper filing procedures, that he'd been paid $200 to look the other way. $200, Abigail said under her breath from the gallery. That's what my home was worth to him. The surveyor Pemberton was located in a town 40 miles south. He'd been drinking heavily since signing the affidavit and was, by all accounts, waiting for someone to come ask the questions he'd been too afraid to answer on his own. His written testimony arrived by Ryder on the second day. It confirmed everything. Hale had paid him to falsify water surveys across 6 properties in Sutter Valley, deliberately misrouting the underground aquifer to force landowners into drought and sell at desperation prices. Whitfield read the testimony aloud in the courtroom. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of an audience, the heavy silence of people realizing they'd been robbed in slow motion and hadn't known it until now. Hale sat in the defendant's chair, with his hands folded and his face composed. He didn't look at Abigail, didn't look at anyone. He stared at a point on the wall above the judge's head and kept his mouth shut. And his attorney, a sweating man from Larson City who'd arrived that morning and already looked like he wished he hadn't, scribbled notes furiously on a legal pad. "Mr. Hale," Whitfield said, "you are hereby detained pending full trial on charges of property fraud, conspiracy to commit theft through false instruments, illegal diversion of natural water resources, and filing of fraudulent debt claims. Bail is denied." Hale's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client—" "Sit down, counselor." The attorney sat. Hale finally looked at Abigail. Across the courtroom, across the distance between a man who owned half a valley and a woman who owned 1 piece of it. His eyes carried no rage, no defeat, just the cold acknowledgement of a man who'd miscalculated and was already planning his next move. Abigail looked back. She didn't flinch, didn't gloat. She just held his gaze the way she held a rifle. Steady, level, ready. Hale looked away first, and everyone in that courtroom saw it. After the hearing, Abigail went straight to the doctor's office. Caleb was sitting up in bed, awake, a tin plate of untouched food on the table beside him. He'd heard the courthouse bell ringing, the one they rang after verdicts, and had been staring at the door ever since. "It's done," Abigail said from the doorway. "Hale's detained, charges filed. The debt claim against my property is voided." Caleb exhaled, long and slow and deep, like a man breathing out something he'd been carrying in his lungs for years. "And the warrant on me?" he asked. "Whitfield's reviewing it. Harker, the federal marshal, says it's clearly purchased. Hale's company filed it. With Hale under indictment, the whole structure collapses." "That doesn't mean it's dropped." "No, but Whitfield wants testimony from you about Abilene, about Prentice, about Sarah Dawes. If you tell the truth—" "I always tell the truth. That's my whole damn problem." Abigail leaned against the doorframe. Then tell it one more time, in a courtroom, under oath, and let a real judge decide instead of a purchased one." Caleb looked at his hands, the bandages, the scars underneath. Every mark a record of a man who'd spent half his life building things he hated, and the other half trying to tear them down. "What if he decides wrong?" Caleb asked. "Then we fight that too." "We?" Did I stutter? He looked at her. She looked at him. The doorframe between them felt like the thinnest wall in the world. "You rode through a canyon at night to save my life," he said. "I rode through a canyon at night to save my land. You just happened to be in the way." "Abigail." "What?" "Thank you." 2 words, quiet as breath, heavy as stone. She felt them land somewhere deep in her chest, in the place she'd sealed shut after Daniel, after the wedding she didn't choose, after the years of silence and whiskey breath, and being told she should be grateful for a roof and a ring. "You're welcome," she said, and meant it in ways she wasn't ready to name. Ruth and Ethan arrived the next afternoon. The boy jumped off the wagon before it stopped moving and ran through town at full speed, dodging a freight cart and nearly colliding with a woman carrying a basket of eggs, until he skidded to a halt outside the doctor's office and burst through the door. Caleb heard him coming. He braced himself, not for impact, but for the emotion he knew would hit harder than any bullet. Ethan stopped 2 feet from the cot, breathing hard, dusty, eyes wide and red-rimmed. "You got shot," the boy said. "I did." "Does it hurt?" "Some." "Good. That means you're alive." Then Ethan did something he hadn't done since his father died. He stepped forward and put his arms around Caleb's neck and held on. Not gently, not carefully. With the full, desperate strength of a child who'd learned too young that people leave, and had just discovered, for the first time, that sometimes they stay. Caleb's hand came up, slow, uncertain, and rested on the back of the boy's head. He didn't speak. His throat wouldn't let him. But his hand stayed, and Ethan's grip tightened, and the doctor in the next room suddenly became very interested in organizing his supply cabinet, and didn't come out for a long time. Abigail watched from the hallway. Ruth stood beside her. "That man loves that boy," Ruth whispered. Abigail pressed her lips together hard, nodded once. Couldn't speak. "And that boy loves him back," Ruth continued. "And if you ask me, I didn't ask you. You love them both, and there ain't a thing wrong with that." Abigail wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Ruth Callahan, if you say one more word, I will cry in public, and I haven't cried in public since I was 14 years old, and I'm not about to start in a doctor's hallway in Fort Sully." Ruth smiled. "Then I'll shut up." "Thank you. But I'm right. I know you're right. Now shut up." They stood in the hallway and watched a broken man hold a broken boy, and neither of them said another word, because some things are too true for language and too sacred for interruption. 3 days later, Caleb testified. He sat in the witness chair with his bandages hidden under a clean shirt Ruth had bought from the general store. And he told the truth about Abilene, about Prentice, about the torch and the house, and the little girl with red hair drawing at the kitchen table. His voice didn't shake. His eyes didn't waver. He spoke the way he did everything, steady, measured, with the controlled force of a man who'd learned that the loudest thing in any room is the truth spoken quietly. The courtroom listened. Whitfield listened. Even Hale's attorney stopped writing and just listened. When Caleb finished, Whitfield removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a cloth. A long, deliberate silence. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, "based on the testimony presented,
The circumstances described and the clear connection between the warrant against you and the criminal enterprise operated by the defendant. I am suspending the warrant pending full review. You are released on your own recognizance." Caleb sat very still. "That means you're free to go, son," Whitfield said, not unkindly. Caleb stood. His legs were unsteady. His side burned. He walked out of the courtroom and down the steps into the sunlight, where Abigail and Ethan and Ruth were waiting.
Ethan spoke first. "So? Warrant suspended. I'm free. Free or court-free? Free enough to walk out of here standing up." Ethan grinned. The first real grin Abigail had seen from him in months. It changed his whole face, made him look his age again, made him look like a boy who still believed good things were possible. "Can we go home now?" Ethan asked. Home. The word hit all three of them differently. Ethan meant the ranch, the cabin, the porch where he sat and counted stars. Ruth meant the valley, the community, the store where she'd built a life after losing her own husband. Abigail meant the land, the well, the ground she'd fought for. Caleb heard the word and felt it open a door inside him that had been locked so long he'd forgotten it existed. "Yeah," Abigail said quietly. She looked at Caleb, not with need, not with gratitude, with recognition. The look of a woman seeing a man clearly for the first time and deciding, not out of desperation, not out of loneliness, but out of choice, that he was worth the risk. "Let's go home." The ride back to Sutter Valley took a full day, and Caleb spent most of it trying not to fall off the horse. Ruth drove the wagon with Ethan beside her. Abigail rode ahead, leading Caleb's horse by a tether, because he kept listing to the left, where the wound pulled every time the road dipped. He didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, just gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles and breathed through his teeth. "You're going to tear those stitches," Abigail called back without turning around. "I'm fine." "You're gray as old dishwater and sweating through your shirt. That's not fine." "It's fine enough." Ethan twisted around on the wagon bench. "You look terrible, Caleb." "Thank you, Ethan." "You're welcome. Can we stop soon? I gotta pee." Ruth snorted. Abigail's shoulders shook once. Even Caleb's mouth twitched through the pain. And just like that, something shifted in the air between all four of them. A loosening, a softening, like a fist unclenching for the first time in weeks. They made camp at the halfway point. Ruth built a small fire. Ethan collected kindling with the focused determination of a boy who needed a job to keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. Abigail changed Caleb's bandages behind the wagon, where the firelight didn't reach. "It's healing clean," she said, pressing fresh cloth against his side. Her fingers were careful, but not gentle. Efficient. The hands of a woman who doctored animals and men, and didn't see much difference between the two. "You've got good hands," Caleb said. "I've got busy hands. There's a difference." "There's a difference in everything with you." She tied off the bandage, tight. He grunted. "That's for scaring me," she said. "The tight bandage?" "The getting shot." "I didn't plan on getting shot." Men never plan on the things that matter most. She gathered the old bandages, started to stand. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not demanding, just there. The way a question is there before the words form. She looked down at his hand, at the scars, at the calluses, at the way his fingers circled her wrist without closing, giving her room to pull away. She didn't pull away. "Abigail," he said, "when this is over, when Hale's convicted and the warrant's cleared and the land is settled, don't." "Don't what?"
Don't make promises in the dark behind a wagon when you've got a hole in your side and your judgment's compromised by blood loss. My judgment's fine. Your judgment led you to ride 2 days toward a town you'd never been to, with a bounty on your head and no proof the judge would listen. Your judgment is questionable at best. And yours led you through a canyon at night, alone. That wasn't judgment. That was stubbornness.
What's the difference? She looked at him. Firelight caught the edge of her face. Something moved behind her eyes that she'd been fighting since the night she'd stood in the barn and told him to stay. Something that had grown roots while she wasn't paying attention and was now pushing up through the hard-packed ground of her resistance like water through stone. The difference, she said quietly, is that judgment can be wrong. Stubbornness doesn't care. She pulled her wrist free, gently, stood up, walked back to the fire. Caleb sat on the dock behind the wagon and pressed his hand flat against the bandage where it was warm from her touch. He closed his eyes. He was in trouble. The deep kind. The kind that didn't heal with stitches. They reached the ranch the next afternoon. Abigail saw it first. The cabin, the barn, the fence line Caleb had rebuilt, the well that held water again. Everything standing. Everything still hers. Ethan jumped off the wagon before Ruth pulled the brake. He ran to the porch, touched the railing, ran to the well, looked down into it, then ran back and stood in the middle of the yard with his arms out like he was measuring the distance between everything he loved. "It's all here," he said, like he hadn't been sure. "It's all here," Abigail said, and her voice cracked on the word all, because it meant more now than it had 3 weeks ago. It meant the land and the boy and the man climbing down from a horse with his jaw clenched against pain and his eyes fixed on the barn where his tools still waited. Ruth unloaded water and supplies. She worked quietly, watching the 3 of them move around the property like pieces of a puzzle finding their places. Ethan at the well, Caleb at the barn, Abigail on the porch. Each one touching something to make sure it was real. "I'll check in tomorrow," Ruth said, climbing back onto the wagon. She looked at Abigail, a long, knowing look that said everything her mouth had the good grace not to repeat. "Thank you, Ruth, for everything. You'd have done the same. I would have complained more." Ruth laughed, a real laugh, the first one Abigail had heard from anyone in weeks. It sounded like rain. That evening, Abigail cooked the first real meal they'd had in days. Beans, cornbread, salt pork from Ruth's stores. Nothing fancy, everything necessary. They ate at the kitchen table, all 3 of them, and nobody spoke much. But the silence was different now. Not the silence of strangers circling each other. The silence of people who'd been through something together and didn't need words to acknowledge it. Ethan ate 2 plates, then 3, then fell asleep at the table with his face pressed against his folded arms. Abigail touched his hair. Caleb stood and lifted the boy, carefully, one arm bracing against the pull of his wound, and carried him to bed. He set Ethan down on the mattress and pulled the blanket up. The boy's hand caught his sleeve. "Stay," Ethan mumbled without opening his eyes. "I'm right outside. Stay in the house." Caleb looked at the doorway. Abigail stood there, watching. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, just watched, letting him decide, letting her decide, letting the moment hold its own weight without anyone pushing it in a direction it wasn't ready to go. "I'll be in the barn," Caleb said softly. He loosened Ethan's fingers from his sleeve. "Same as always." The boy's hand dropped. He rolled over. His breathing evened out. The cough was still there, but quieter now, less desperate. Like even his lungs knew the worst was over. Caleb walked past Abigail in the doorway.
close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. He stopped. "Good night, Mrs. Mercer." "Good night, Mr. Reed." He walked to the barn. She watched him go.
Then she closed the door and leaned against it and pressed her hands flat against her chest and said it again. The same word she'd whispered weeks ago when this whole impossible thing started. Don't. But this time, she didn't mean it. And she knew she didn't mean it. And that scared her more than Hale and Dunnigan and the drought combined. A week passed. The land recovered. The well held. Water flowed steady and clean, and every morning Abigail drew a bucket and stood there for a moment, staring at her own reflection in it, reminding herself that this was real. Caleb healed. Not fast. The doctor in Fort Sully had warned him 3 weeks minimum, but steady. He worked anyway. Lighter tasks, sharpening tools, mending tack, teaching Ethan to shoe a horse, which involved more patience than Abigail had ever seen any human being demonstrate with an 11-year-old who asked 40 questions per nail. "Why's this one bent?" "Because you hit it crooked." Why'd I hit it crooked? Because you're learning. When will I stop hitting it crooked? When you stop asking questions and start watching the nail. Ethan went quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "What if the nail's crooked to start with?" Caleb looked at the boy. Ethan looked back with an expression of total innocence that fooled absolutely no one. "Then you straighten it first," Caleb said. "And you don't hit it until you're sure." That's kind of a life lesson, ain't it? It's a horseshoe, Ethan. It can be both. Something warm moved through Caleb's chest. Not pain, the opposite. The thing that happens when a piece of you that's been missing slides back into place, and you realize you've been walking around with a hole in yourself so long you forgot it was there. "Yeah," he said. "It can be both." News filtered in from Fort Sully through Ruth, who rode out every few days with supplies and updates and opinions nobody asked for, but everybody needed. Hale's trial was set for October. Pemberton, the surveyor, had agreed to testify in full. 3 other landowners in the valley had come forward with evidence of forged documents and pressured sales. The county clerk, Pettigrew, emboldened by his own confession, had produced a ledger of every payment Hale's company had made to local officials. Bribes, kickbacks, and consulting fees that consulted nothing and served no one but Hale. "It's falling apart," Ruth said, spreading butter on cornbread at Abigail's table. "The whole thing. His company, his contracts, everything. Federal investigators are involved now. Word is, Hale's railroad backers are distancing themselves fast." "Rats from a ship," Abigail said. "Expensive rats, in very nice suits." "And Dunnigan? Stripped of commission, facing charges for false deputization and assault with intent. That bounty he carried wasn't worth the paper it was printed on." Abigail poured coffee. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady for days now. She'd noticed it the way you notice the absence of pain, suddenly, with surprise, wondering when it stopped. "And the warrant on Caleb?" Ruth paused, set down her cornbread. "Whitfield dismissed it yesterday. Self-defense ruling based on testimony and corroborating evidence from Sarah Dawes. She wrote a letter, 5 pages. Said Caleb saved her children's lives and that Prentice would have killed them all." Abigail sat down slowly. "It's dismissed? Fully?" "Fully. He's a free man, Abigail. No warrant, no bounty, no charges." The words settled over her like something she'd been waiting to hear, without knowing she'd been waiting. She put her coffee cup down because her hands weren't steady anymore. "Have you told him?" she asked. "That's not mine to tell." Abigail looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back with the expression of a woman who'd been married 23 years before her husband died, and knew exactly what love looked like when it was trying to pretend it was something else.
Go tell him, Ruth said. And for the love of God, Abigail, when you do, say something real.
Abigail found Caleb at the east fence. He was checking the posts he'd set weeks ago, running his hand along each one, testing for give. His shirt was open at the collar. The bandage underneath was thinner now, the wound closing, the body doing what bodies do when they're given enough time and enough reason to heal.
Caleb.
He turned. Something in her voice made him straighten up and go still, the way he did when things mattered.
Whitfield dismissed the warrant, she said. Sarah Dawes wrote a letter. Self-defense. You're cleared.
He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with his hand on the fence post and his gray eyes locked on hers. And she watched something happen to his face that she'd never seen before. Not a smile, not tears, something deeper. The look of a man who'd been carrying a dead weight for 4 years and just felt it lift off his back and hit the ground. His knees bent, not buckling, choosing. He went down slow, one knee in the dust, then both. He pressed his hands flat against the earth and dropped his head. Abigail took a step forward, stopped, took another.
Caleb.
Give me a minute. His voice was rough, broken at the edges. Just give me a minute. She gave him a minute, stood 3 feet away and let him kneel in the dirt of her land and feel the weight leave him. Let him shake without touching him, because some things a person has to carry through alone, even the letting go. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them, didn't hide it, just looked up at her from his knees with everything he was showing on his face. I've been running for 4 years, he said. Every town, every job, every meal. I ate with one eye on the door, slept with my boots on. Never unpacked, because unpacking means staying, and staying means someone finds you. No one's finding you, Abigail said. Not here. I know. He pressed his palms harder against the ground. That's what scares me.
Why?
Because I don't know who I am when I'm not running. I've been the man on the poster so long, I forgot there was somebody underneath. Abigail knelt in front of him, right there in the dust, in the middle of her own property, 2 feet from the fence he'd built with bleeding hands. She knelt so their eyes were level, so he couldn't look up at her or down at her, so they were equal. I'll tell you who you are, she said. You're the man who fixed my well when he didn't have to, who taught my boy to swing a hammer, who slept in my barn for 2 weeks and never once crossed a line I didn't draw, who rode 2 days with a target on his back to bring a judge the truth, who took a bullet and still told me to keep going. Abigail, I'm not done. Her voice was firm, not harsh. The voice of a woman who'd decided something and wasn't going to let fear talk her out of it. You asked me once if I thought you were a good man. I told you one good choice wasn't enough. I was wrong. It's not about one choice. It's about every choice, every day, over and over. And every choice I've seen you make has been the right one. I've made plenty of wrong ones. So have I. I married a man I didn't love because my father told me to. I buried him without crying because I'd run out of tears years before he died. I took in a boy I couldn't afford to feed because the alternative was letting him go to strangers. Every one of those choices made me who I am, and who I am is a woman standing in the dust, telling a man on his knees that he's allowed to stop running. Caleb looked at her, at the sun-browned face and the cracked lips, and the eyes that held more fire than any drought could burn out. At the woman who'd loaded a rifle and faced down a bounty hunter and ridden through a canyon at night and stood in a courtroom and dismantled the most powerful man in the valley with nothing but documents and nerve. "I will not be rescued and then owned," she said, repeating the word she'd spoken to herself weeks ago. "That hasn't changed. I don't need you to save me. I don't need you to stay out of guilt or obligation, or because you think I can't manage alone. I've been alone. I can do alone. I'm good at alone." "I know. But I'm tired of alone, Caleb. And if you stay, if you choose to stay, it's as a partner, not a protector, not a savior, a partner. Someone who stands beside me, not in front of me." "I've never been anyone's partner. Neither have I. So we'll figure it out together." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers closed around hers, scarred around unscarred, rough around rough. Two hands that had spent their whole lives gripping hard to keep from falling, and were now, for the first time, holding on to something worth keeping. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "Stay. Build. Be someone a boy can look up to and a woman can trust. I don't have practice at any of that." "Practice starts with showing up. You've been doing that since the day you walked through my gate." He looked at her hand in his, turned it over, traced the calluses on her palm with his thumb. Each one a record of work done, hardship survived, life held together by force of will. "You've never met a man my size," he said quietly. "I know. You told me." "I wasn't talking about height." She squeezed his hand, hard. "I know what you were talking about." They stayed there, kneeling in the dust, holding hands like two people who'd just survived a flood and were touching solid ground for the first time. Not romantic, not cinematic, just real. The way real things are, messy and imperfect and worth every bruise. Ethan found them like that. He came running from the barn with a horseshoe in his hand, waving it like a trophy. "I did it! I got the nail straight! Caleb, I got the—" He stopped, looked at them, kneeling in the dust, holding hands. His face went through about 6 expressions in 2 seconds, ending on one that was half grin and half something older and wiser. "Finally," the boy said. "Ethan," Abigail started, "I've been waiting weeks for this. Weeks! You two are the slowest people alive." Caleb laughed. Actually laughed. A real sound, deep and rough and rusty from disuse, like a door opening that hadn't been opened in years. Abigail looked at him, and something in her broke open. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. Joy, pure and clean and unexpected as rain in a drought. "Come here," she said to Ethan. The boy walked over, stood between them. Caleb put a hand on his shoulder. Abigail put a hand on the other. "So, are you staying?" Ethan asked, looking at Caleb. Direct. No games. The way children ask the questions adults are too afraid to voice. "I'm staying." "For real? Not just for now?" "For real." "You promise?" Caleb remembered what he'd told the boy weeks ago, that he didn't make promises, that promises were just words people used to make themselves feel better about leaving. He looked at Abigail. She nodded, the smallest nod, barely a movement, but it held the weight of everything she'd decided and everything she was offering and everything she trusted him not to break. "I promise," Caleb said. Ethan's chin trembled. He blinked hard, twice. Then he held up the horseshoe. "Good, because I bent 3 nails getting this right, and I ain't doing it again without supervision." Ruth arrived the next morning with a wagon load of supplies and found all 3 of them at the breakfast table. Ethan was eating cornbread. Caleb was drinking coffee. Abigail was reading Daniel's unfinished letter one last time. She folded it carefully, set it aside,
looked at Ruth. "It's done," she said. Ruth looked at Caleb, at Abigail, at the space between them that had shrunk from 20 feet to 3 feet to nothing at all. "About time," Ruth said, and sat down and poured herself a cup of coffee, like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than any of them. Weeks later, the first rain came. Not the violent kind, not the desperate, flooding, too-late kind. A slow, steady rain that fell straight down without wind, soaking into the cracked earth the way forgiveness soaks into the places that have been dry too long. The well overflowed for the first time. Water ran clear and cold and sweet. Ethan stood on the porch with his palms up, catching drops. His cough was gone. The color had come back to his face. He looked like a boy again, just a boy, standing in the rain, laughing. Caleb stood beside Abigail at the porch rail. Their shoulders touched. He reached down and took her hand. She let him. They stood there and watched the rain fall on land that was theirs, legally, finally, completely theirs. And neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say that the rain wasn't already saying. Abigail turned to him. "You know what Daniel wrote in that letter? The one he never finished?" "What?" "He wrote, 'I believe Hale intends to,' and then it stopped. He never finished the sentence." "He didn't have to. You finished it for him." "No." She shook her head. "We finished it. All of us. Ruth, Ethan, you, even Daniel in his sorry, broken way. He started something he couldn't end, and we ended it." Caleb looked at the rain, at the land, at the boy laughing on the porch. "You think he'd be proud?" Caleb asked.
Daniel was never proud of anything. She paused. "But I think, wherever he is, he's relieved. That's close enough." Ethan ran over, soaking wet, grinning so wide it split his face. "The well's overflowing," he shouted. "There's water everywhere! Real water! Caleb, can we build a trough? A real one? Big enough for horses?" "We can build whatever you want." "And a chicken coop? Ruth says she's got extra hens." "Chicken coop too." "And maybe," Ethan's eyes lit up, "maybe a room? On the barn? For you? So you don't have to sleep on hay?" Caleb looked at Abigail. She raised one eyebrow. "We'll talk about where Mr. Reed sleeps later," she said. But the corner of her mouth turned up, and Caleb saw it, and Ethan saw it, and Ruth, who had appeared on the road with her wagon and was pulling up to the gate with a crate of hens and an expression of supreme satisfaction, saw it too. "I brought chickens," Ruth called out. "And don't nobody argue with me about it." "Nobody's arguing, Ruth." "Good, because I also brought pie." Ethan's head whipped around. "What kind?" "The kind you eat and say thank you." The boy took off running toward the wagon. Ruth climbed down and started unloading. Caleb walked over to help, and Ruth stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You take care of them," she said, low, serious. The voice of a woman who'd lost her own husband and knew exactly what it cost to love people in a world that took them away. "That woman and that boy, they're the best thing in this valley. You take care of them." "Yes, ma'am." "And if you don't, I'll shoot you myself. And I won't miss." "I believe you." "Good." She handed him a crate of hens. "Now make yourself useful." That evening, the four of them sat on the porch, rain still falling, soft and steady, the kind that doesn't stop for hours and doesn't need to apologize for taking its time. Ethan ate pie until his stomach hurt, then fell asleep with his head on Abigail's lap. Ruth rocked in the chair Daniel used to sit in and hummed a hymn she half remembered from a church she used to attend before life got too complicated for Sunday mornings. Caleb sat on the step with his back against the porch post. Abigail's hand rested on his shoulder. Not holding, just resting. The way you rest your hand on something solid when you want to remind yourself it's there. "Caleb," she said softly,
That first day, when you showed up at my gate. What were you going to do if I'd pulled the trigger? He thought about it, honestly. I reckon I'd have deserved it, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got. She moved her hand from his shoulder to the back of his neck. Her thumb traced the line where his hair met skin. He closed his eyes. Don't ever show up at a stranger's gate again, she said. I won't need to. Why not? He opened his eyes, looked up at her, at the woman who'd aimed a rifle at his chest and let him live,
Who'd ridden through a canyon to save his life and called it stubbornness, who'd knelt in the dust and offered him something no one had ever offered him before. Not rescue, not redemption, but partnership. The hard, honest, daily work of building a life together, board by board, choice by choice. Because I'm home, he said. Abigail looked at the rain, at the land, at the sleeping boy in her lap, and the friend rocking in the chair, and the man sitting on her porch step with his scars and his steady hands and his gray eyes that had finally, after years of watching the world like a threat, started watching it like a promise. Yeah, she said. You are. The rain kept falling. The well kept filling. The land held firm beneath them. And for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, nobody was running. Nobody was scared. And nobody was alone. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.